Welcome to Knowing I Am. I'm Ken Ward, and with me is Matt Milley.
Hello.
And Allison Dawson.
Hello.
If you came to this podcast through the internet, I want to encourage you to go to our website, knowingiam.org, and click on the Start Here podcast located on the homepage so you may know what this is all about. If you're a listener working through the core lessons, then welcome back and let's get started. This is lesson number 2, entitled, So Will the Real God Please Stand Up? This is the second lesson of the core lesson series. In lesson number 1, we discussed the importance of what we believe, the reality of absolute truth, ways to test truth, and some things to consider about ourselves and our current beliefs. We saw that to move forward, we have to decide first if an absolute God exists. The goal of this lesson is to consider some arguments against the existence of God, to define what constitutes an absolute God, look at the many gods in the world and how they stand against our definition, and finally, to determine if a God currently exists that we know of that rises to the top.
And so we want to welcome Allison, who is one of the co-founding ministers of Knowing I Am Ministries. We're blessed with her presence.
So let's get started. So Matt, what are some of the arguments against the existence of God that we have to overcome?
Well, Ken, whenever I started to think about this idea of absolute God, there's a few things that I was taught in school that I had to reconcile or think about. I had to think them through and take each one. And of course, probably a lot of people are familiar with the Big Bang Theory. And for those that don't know exactly what that is, it's that everything began at a point in time where in nothingness, hydrogen molecule came into existence and something made it explode. And that was the beginning of the universe. Most scientists, whether they believe in God or don't believe in God, most of them will agree that time, space, matter, or the universe that we know all began about 16 billion years ago. Of course, in that in itself has some problems because they believe we can see stars that are 37 billion light years away. And it's kind of hard to explain why we can see those stars if the universe only started 16 billion years ago. Regardless, just like anything else, that's a theory and it's got some problems. And as you think through some of the issues, the next thing that you have to think about is theory of evolution. Again, this is a theory, even though it's taught fact today. And Ken, you taught school and you were in statistics. How would you define a theory?
Well, a theory is something that has to be proven. A mathematical theorem has to be proven before you can use it. So until it's proven, theory is not a fact. That's one of the problems that science has, is presenting theories as facts.
I would agree with that. Not only are they presenting the theories as fact, but they're also presenting a theory without providing the evidence-based proof on which that theory is based.
Yeah, Matt, it's if we refer a lot to John Lennox, and as he talked about, they started out before Darwin. They had gotten as far as science saying the Earth was 70,000 years old, and I'm assuming that that's 1,000 years for each day in creation before then Darwin comes along, and then they start saying evolution happened, and so they start adding years because it's real difficult to explain how a species survived long enough to mutate to be able to survive. But if you say, oh, well, it took millions of years, then people will go, oh, okay. There's a lot of logical problems with that.
The thing I'm trying to point out here is there's some things you're going to have to reconcile about these. I think what a lot of people don't take into account is time. If you're going from an eternal time and then there's a creation of time, what happens to time when it has to slow down, if you will, or come into existence? We think about the 60-second minute and the 60-minute hour and the 24-hour day and 365-day year. So, we've got this understanding of time being consistent, but maybe it wasn't that consistent in the beginning, and I wasn't there, but you got to leave room, because the thing that most scientists can't do is they can't tell you what gravity is. They can't tell you what energy is. We can describe it. We can put formulas and calculate things, but in the end, nobody knows what it is.
Right.
And so even then, I would say we don't even know what time is. So we have to be careful to not close our mind to the way things may have come into existence.
Well, it's like we talked about time. When you get away from Earth, time for us is a relationship between Earth and Sun, right? If you get away from the Earth, if you head out into space, get outside our solar system, you're no longer in contact with anybody at Earth. Your watch battery dies, and you have no measurement of time. What is your concept of time then? We don't understand that.
Right, and on that same note, you have people who do just the opposite. They measure the calendar year by the moon phases, and so they're measuring by the star movement, by the moon phases.
Right.
And so then you do look back at Genesis and how the creation and science do come together. The world was created, but it was created with the appearance of age.
Right.
And so then it may appear to be 17 billion years old or however many billions of years old, but it was actually one day old.
So Kenny and I are talking about a lot of the things that are kind of amusing if you think about evolution. For example, we understand, let's say it did happen. Let's say that there was that primal soup and all of a sudden this single cell amoeba came into existence. And the theory of evolution is survival of the fittest, to be able to procreate and exist and be able to change so that you can exist. And how long did that first single cell amoeba go, I'm going to have to reproduce?
Right.
Is it going to take billions of years? Did it live billions of years so that it could reproduce?
Yeah, so was the first cell to actually be life, was it immortal? And if so, where is it? If it were not, how many times did this accident happen until this thing figured out it needed to reproduce? And then how many accidental mutations had to occur in order for these things to reproduce one time? The mathematics of it is staggering. And the probability of that happening got to be really close to zero. Just saying.
To try to explain how life began is, being honest, it kind of sounds good and it could be true. Again, it's a theory. Then what's more amazing is how did life continue to exist after that moment in time? Because that's where the real challenge comes in. Another thing we talked about, I remember hearing at one point they were talking about how man come from monkeys, we're in the trees, our feet were shaped like hands, and then so the monkeys started coming out of the trees. They're in the trees to begin with to stay away from the tigers. And so due to the food supply being short, supposedly the monkeys came out of the tree and they were on the ground, and then they had to learn to run from the tigers. I mean, I could only imagine how many monkeys they went through, and they finally said, well, we're going to have to change our feet before we go down there. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. And so how do you sit there and purposely think, oh, well, I'm going to start changing my foot so that I can run? I mean, what happens when it's halfway between a hand and a foot?
And again, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Of all the fossils that have been found, of all of the artifact finds that there are, where's the evidence? Just show me.
There has never been a single documented case of one species evolving into another because they put that billions of years on there to make sure that we can't prove it. If you can't disprove it.
It's kind of like pick a number between 1 and 100 and tell me the one I'm thinking.
Right.
Slap a number on it, get somewhere close in the neighborhood of 17 billion, give or take a few billion.
Right.
And I think probably the bottom line, what we're talking about this is, if you have an understanding of the theory of evolution and the Big Bang Theory, or you think part of that's true, the bottom line is you're going to, have to really work through some issues on it. If you're happy with it, fine, move forward. Like I said in the last lesson, if I'm not saying throw anything away, put it up on a shelf. And if you find that it actually bears out to be true, put it into place and you can stand on it. But there are going to be some challenges as you move forward. I want to reiterate, these are theories. They're not fact.
Right.
So you don't have to believe them at all.
Exactly.
Right, and people can make an argument for or against anything they want to make an argument for. This just happens to be one, these are three, I guess, different specific arguments over the existence of God. Again, people can argue whatever they want to all day long. In fact, I'm looking at the Big Bang Theory. I'm thinking, okay, that one instance in time, everything all of a sudden miraculously, instead of going the opposite direction and total destruction and chaos happening, it all came together and, totally reverses Newton's second law. And here we are.
Right.
But they've decided now that it was not one single point that caused the Big Bang, that there were several factors happening at the same time, which sort of evolved, and then there was the spark now that they're calling the Big Bang. So you can have arguments for or against anything and still call it what you want to call it. The bottom line is, here we are, and we do exist, so now let's move forward.
Right, and that's really the thing. So what do we do now? We can't prove all of these prehistoric stuff. So the fact is, if there is a God, we want to find the right one. So that's where we are. So when you think of the God, what characteristics do you expect or demand? What do you expect them to be?
Let me just kind of preface this. Again, we've said in the lesson, this is kind of each of ours in some way or another part of our path as we've dug for truth and trying to understand things. And specifically, I think about this one where I wanted to make sure that I was looking for God, right? And I remember particularly I went to a bookstore and I was going to buy a book, and I asked it, do you have a book that tells about all the different religions and gods and all? And they said, well, yeah, we do, but we're sold out. So you can look around here. And so I was looking, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to buy like 20 books. That's going to be like $500. My whole point is this. I mean, we know in India alone, there's 1.5 million gods and counting. And you can sit there and compare and look at each god or each theory or each philosophy or each belief that's out there. You can look at each one and see which one you believe to be real. But I decided to take a different path, which is I wanted to define for me, if there is a God, what would that God have to be? If we can, as we move forward in the notes here, we'll look and see how, if we can apply some of the things that would have to be, some of the gods out there, how would they compare to what I need to be God? So
Right.
If you look in the notes, the first thing has to be an eternal God. There can't be two gods. If there's two gods, then you can always say which one created the other. I don't want one that there to be two gods. I want there to be one ultimate God. At anything you can argue what created that, what created this God, or what created this thing. I don't want to eliminate that by it being an eternal God that is at the very beginning. It has to be a creator God is what I'm trying to say.
And I think the point is it has to be creator God, not just some, I'm going to worship the sun god or moon god or whatever.
Right.
All of these different gods these polytheistic religions believe. The creator God is what you're getting at. Because if there is a creator and life is sustained and continues, then that God is continuing to create and sustain life. So as long as life continues, then that God is continuing to create and sustain life. So in my brain, I'm thinking, of course, I want this God to be eternal because I want to see that life is continuous. It's not evolving, it's being created and it's being sustained.
Another thing about the creator God, though, is if you're looking for meaning in life and you want to know where you came from, maybe if there's a creator God, it'll help explain origin. Where did we come from? Right?
Exactly. And I was thinking, they talk about the Big Bang Theory. We're talking about how they explain how the universe began and all this. But if they want you to explain where God came from, if I can explain my God, then it's not much of a God. Because if I can understand him well enough to explain him, explain where he came from, explain why and how he can do things, then I'm just making it up.
And then it's in the note, my God have to be all powerful, because if something was more powerful than him, he wouldn't be the ultimate God, right?
Right.
Have to know all things, all knowing, because if you could hide your thoughts from him, or he didn't know everything, wouldn't be an absolute God. Has to be everywhere, because if I could hide from him, then he wouldn't be much of a God if he can't be in all places at all times. I mean, seriously, if I'm going to look for God, I want the biggest, baddest God I can find.
And I got to throw in my big fancy words on this one, Matt. Omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. That means all powerful, all knowing, all present, everywhere. And that's what, if God is not that, not God.
I felt like it was important to define God, at least for me, and that's what I'm looking for in a God. So instead of I have something I can compare all these other gods to and hold them up to the my God test and see how they bear out. If you look at the next one, how do many facets of gods compare to those characteristics? Obviously, you can take something like an idol, something that's made out of material or something, and back in the day, they would make little statues out of wood or something like that, and I know it's supposed to represent a God, but I could take any idol or any symbol of a God like that. You can set it on fire, you can chop it up with a hatchet. Obviously that's not much of a God, right? I mean,
Right.
back in the day,
Destructible, yeah.
yeah, destructible. And it's made with a man's hands, and there's nothing to these gods. They can't talk to you. They can't think. I understand why they had idols back then, but there's nothing to them.
Well, I think but it does show that humans have always had a desire to find God, that there is something other than us.
Right, and we have that innate desire just to, we're searching. Why is my favorite question. You can ask any of the kids that I ever taught. Why? I want to know why. Explain to me why. Show me what you're talking about. Explain to me why that's your reasoning, and I want to see what it is that you're talking about. If I can tear this thing up, if I can throw this thing away, if this thing is not going to stand any test of time, why would I want it to be my God?
Exactly.
So if you look at the notes, when we talk about a human, what comes to mind when we talk about a human is, well, first off, I would say maybe Buddha would be considered a human type God, but he left behind a philosophy of life, a wise teacher in his time.
Gandhi.
Yeah, and the thing about a human, anybody wants to make a human a god is, I'm pretty sure Buddha's still 6 feet under.
Yeah.
You know, he's gone.
Well, and another example of that, Matt, is modern example. A lot of people talk about Bob Marley these days. Rastafarians. Their whole thing had to do with Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. He was the second coming of Christ. He's dead. He didn't come back. So, I don't know what that does to their religion then.
Some of the other gods that are out there, I mean, and here again, you look back in time like created things. I think about the Aztec and they worshiped the sun. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Egyptians worshiped the frog. There's also, we talked about some really strange gods that were back there, like the body of a man and the head of a dog. But, maybe we can try to explain that in another lesson.
Yeah.
But my point about that is if you're going to create a created thing, you still hadn't gotten to the creator.
Yes.
And so you can see these things out there in creation. There's, you can worship trees, you can worship dogs, you can worship anything you want to worship that's created. A lot of people have, but I'm not talking about these gods. Automatically throw them out of the way because they're not creator. They are created things. And then, of course, we got philosophies. A lot of people live by a different philosophy. Maybe the caste system or something in India may be a philosophy. And I wanted to read the definition of philosophy. The study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline. So if you're trying to live your life by a study of fundamental nature and knowledge, that may not be a good idea to try to live your life off of man's wisdom, because like we talked about before, there's a lot of problems with some theories out there. And we're not talking about living under the power of our own brain. Now, you may want to do that, but I can throw out philosophies because what I'm looking for is a creator God.
The process of elimination is a pretty easy way to throw out what makes sense, what's logical, what doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
What's created. And again, we're looking at all of these things that have been created and these things that people have worshipped in the past and now, and they want to call them their gods. You can eliminate all of those things that are created because, again, process of elimination tells you that X and Y are not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, on the notes, I just got to say something about aliens because somebody always brings that up when I talk to them about this. Again, the aliens, you got the same argument. Where'd they come from? Who created them?
One of my favorite shows is on the History Channel, and it's Ancient Aliens. Mm-hmm. I love to look at all of I love to watch the episodes of it, and they never get down to saying, okay, this is an alien, and but something from an unknown world, which leads you to believe, okay, are they speaking spiritually here? Are they speaking physically here? Nevertheless, it's created. We're talking about created beings again. Whether they're from here or not, they're still created beings, so they're not God.
Right.
Because again, X and Y are two different things.
Yeah.
Process of elimination.
Exactly. Okay, Matt, then of major religions, major ideas of gods, what gods claim to be creators?
If you were to take all these other gods and hold them up to the test like we did, and as Allison so eloquently said, really it boils down to two. There's only two that claim to have a creator God, and that would be Allah, the God of Islam, and then Elohim, which is the God of the Jews. One thing I want to be sure and point out is Allah is just Arabic word for God. So you could go to Arabia today, and if they say God, they're going to say Allah. It doesn't mean they're actually talking about the same God as you're talking about. That's just their word for God. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying Allah here because that's the one that with Islam. And the way Islam is a creator God, if you actually go to the Bible in Genesis 15:1, it starts there, and you go through chapter 18 verse 14, it explains the split where Abraham had Isaac and then also he had Ishmael.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
With Hagar, his servant. Ishmael went on to, go down line. That would become the Islamic State, if you will. And then, of course, Isaac going down line would become the Jewish state. There's that argument of which one is the child of promise. But we're not going to talk about that right now for this time being. But that's where those two connect. If you go further back, it's Abraham's God, which is the creator God. The point about that is we're just trying to find the creator God. It's not that Allah, the God of Islam, and Elohim, the God of the Jews, are two different creator gods. If you tie them in there, then they go back to the original creator God, which is Elohim, the God of the Jews. And one thing I want to point out about Islam, and we'll talk about this in a future lesson, is the Quran wasn't written till 610 AD by Muhammad. So, the first 5,000 years, we had the scripture of the Bible to talk about the God of the Jews. I would say that the only creator God that is known that makes that claim is going to be the God of the Jews.
Right. Whatever name you want to call him, we're talking about the God that Abraham worshipped.
That's correct.
That is the God that is as you said, claims to be creator. No one else claims that.
You can just go to the Bible, open it up to Genesis 1:1, and you'll see right there the very first verse. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." So here you have the very first thing out of the box is a claim of creating the heavens and the earth. So that's why I'm saying it's a creator God. What that tells me in my search for a creator God, and what we need to determine is if we can trust the Bible. So in lesson 3, trusting the scriptures. So at the bottom of this lesson, you'll see a link talking about the God of Islam. This is not our work, but it's something that I did find on the internet, and it's pretty good in giving an explanation of some of the characteristics of the God of Islam and how it differs from the God of the Jews, and also gives a better explanation of who the God of Islam is. Also, we're going to recommend a John Lennox video. John Lennox is a professor at Oxford in mathematics. He has argued many atheists, and the YouTube clip that we picked for you there, he gives some good arguments to help you understand the relationship between God and science. Also, once you get done with that video clip, there's another link we're going to have down there for you that is going to be called Genesis, Is It History? That is a movie actually that kind of gives some different perspectives or explanations of some of the things that are alternative views of looking at some of the things in science that may be a better explanation of what we see.
And one key element of growing and understanding is to maintain an open mind going into this, because imagine people hearing what you were talking about there is Genesis history. Whether you want to believe anything from scriptures yet or not, keep an open mind, watch it, and may change your mind about it. Who had the ears to hear? Let me hear. Who will not hear? Let me hear. Who had the ears to hear? Let me hear.